Hello everyone. Well, for today's video, I thought I would do some reading for you. I have found this magazine, or this quarterly, that comes out 4 times a year, obviously. And every issue revolves around a theme. And for this issue, the theme is youth. And it's a collection of writings on that theme from throughout history. So I'm about halfway through it, and I've already come across some really excellent writings or excerpts of writings from various different people. Some of them are really famous, some of them are not, and some of them are very thought-provoking. So, along with the pieces of literature, there are also reproductions of art throughout the magazine. So I found this about 3 weeks ago and bought a copy of it, and I have since subscribed to the magazine, and I'm looking forward to the next issue. So anyway, let me get to the first piece that I picked out. I have it bookmarked here. So it starts out with the first section is called Salad Days, and I think that has a lot to do with the very beginnings of childhood. Kind of leading up to preteen years, or teen years. So here's the first section that I want to read to you. And this was written in Nice in 1876. And it's called Paths to Glory. And then down here it tells who wrote it. Maria, and I do not know how to pronounce this name correctly, Bashkirtseva. It's from her journal. She was a young girl. At the age of 18, she wrote, "To die without leaving anything behind me, to die like a dog. Just 100,000 women have died, whose names are barely inscribed on their tombstone. God wills that I should renounce everything and give myself up entirely to art." She exhibited paintings at the Paris Salon for the first time in 1880, and 4 years later she died of tuberculosis. Her journals were published in 1887, prompting the British Prime Minister William Gladstone to call the author a true genius. So she was about 16 when she wrote this. Sunday, July 2nd. Oh, how hot it is and how dull. Now, I am wrong to call it dull. One cannot be dull with so many mental resources as I have. I am not dull because I can read, sing, paint, and muse to myself, but I am restless and depressed. Is my poor youth to be spent between the dining room and petty domestic worries? A woman lives from 16 to 40. I shudder at the thought of losing even a month of my life. What is the good of my having studied, of having tried to know more than other women, of priding myself on knowing all the branches of learning that are attributed to famous men in their biographies? I have some idea of them all, but I've only really gone into history, literature, and natural philosophy, so as to read everything about them, everything that is interesting. As a matter of fact, I find everything interesting that I put my heart into, and this sets me on fire. What then is the good of my having studied and thought? Why endowed with wit, beauty, and voice? To grow moldy? To be bored to death? If I were ignorant and coarse, perhaps I should be happy. Not a single soul to talk to. A girl of 16 cannot be quite satisfied with the family circle, especially when she is a girl like me. Of course, Grandpa is clever, but then he is old and blind, and he is everlastingly quarreling with his man and grumbling about dinner. Mama has plenty of spirit, but not much information. Her manners are not polished, she hasn't any tact, and her mind has got dull and rusty through her never talking about anything but the servants, my health, and the dogs. Auntie is rather better. She even rather impresses you when you don't know her well. Have I ever mentioned their ages? Mama would still be a fine woman if it were not for her bad health, and Auntie is a few years younger, but she looks the elder of the two. She is not good-looking, but tall and well-proportioned. I am going away tomorrow. I cannot say how sorry I am to leave Nice. All the preparations for the journey rather damp my resolution. I have selected the music to take with me, and some books, the encyclopedia, a volume each of Plato, Dante, Aristotle, and Shakespeare, and also a number of English novels by Bulwer, Collins, and Dickens. I was rude to Auntie, and then I went out to the terrace, and I stopped out in the garden till dusk. How lovely the twilight is with the sea of space for background, and the luxuriant plants and thick foliaged trees. And then, by way of contrast, the bamboo and the palms. The fountain, the grotto with its little waterfall trickling from rock to rock before falling into the basin. All around, the bushy trees give the spot a look of peacefulness and mystery, which makes one lazy and sets one dreaming. Why does water always make one dreamy? I stopped in the garden and looked at a stone vase in which a lovely canna was just unfolding. I thought how pretty my white dress and leafy crown must look at the entrance of the garden. Is that what I am ever to do in life? Dress myself carefully, put leaves in my hair, and think about the effect? Well, candidly, if other people were to read me, I think they would consider me a bore. I am still so young and know so little of life. I cannot speak with the authority of the appearance of writers who profess, what presumption, to know men, to lay down laws, or bind their maxims on other people. My maid is here with a dress for me to wear tomorrow, and it reminds me of my departure. I went back to my room, followed by all the dogs. I drew my white trunk close to the table. My chief regret, my diary. It is part of myself. Every day I have been in the habit of running through the pages of one of my manuscript books when I wish to recall Rome or Nice, or something older still. When people talk of glory, soul, or beauty, they are only talking of love. They only talk of glory and beauty in order to make a fitting, handsome frame for that picture which is always the same, yet ever new. The idea of leaving my diary here hurts me. Poor diary, it contains all of my strivings towards the light, all those aspirations that would be considered those of an impressionist genius if they were crowned in the end with success. If, on the other hand, I never come to anything, they will be looked upon as the conceited ravings of a commonplace person. To marry and have children, any washerwoman can do that, unless I could find a civilized and enlightened man, or one who is pliant and very much in love. What do I want? Oh, you know very well. I want glory. I thought that was a very interesting article written by a 16-year-old girl in 1876. Reminds me that even though people are separated by time, in many ways, every age, every person has the same struggles they go with. This piece was written by Robert Louis Stevenson. And it talks about young children and learning. We grown people can tell ourselves a story, give or take strokes along the buckler's ring, ride far and fast, marry, fall, and die, all while sitting quietly by the fire or lying prone in a bed. This is exactly what a child cannot do, or does not do, at least, when he finds anything else. He works all with lay figures and stage properties. When his story comes to the fighting, he must rise, get something by the way of a sword, and have a set-to with a piece of furniture until he is out of breath. When he comes to ride with the king's pardon, he must bestride a chair, which he will so hurry and belabor, and on which he will so furiously demean himself, that the messenger will arrive, if not bloody with spurring, at least fiery red with haste. If his romance involves an accident upon a cliff, he must clamber in person upon the chest of drawers and fall bodily upon the carpet, before his imagination is satisfied. Dead soldiers, dolls, all toys, in short, are in the same category and answer to the same end. Nothing can stagger a child's faith. He accepts the clumsiness of substitutes and can swallow the most jarring incongruities. The chair he has just been besieging as a castle or valiantly cutting to the ground as a dragon is taken away for the accommodation of a morning visitor, and he is nothing abashed. He can skirmish by the hour with a stationary coal scuttle. In the midst of the enchanted pleasures, he can see, without sensible shock, the gardener soberly digging potatoes for the day's dinner. He can make abstraction of whatever does not fit into his fable, and he puts his eyes into his pocket just as we hold our nose in an unsavory lane. It is so that although the ways of children cross with those of their elders in 100 places daily, they never go in the same direction, nor so much as lie in the same element. So may the telegraph wires intersect the lines of the high road, or might a landscape painter and a bagman visit the same country, and yet move in different worlds. People struck with these spectacles cry aloud about the power of imagination in the young. Indeed, there may be two words to that. It is, in some ways, a pedestrian fantasy that the child exhibits. It is the grown people who make the nursery stories. All the children do is zealously preserve the text. It is out of a dozen reasons why Robinson Crusoe should be so popular with the youth. It is that it hits at their level in this manner so nicely. Crusoe was always at makeshifts, and had, in so many words, to play at a great variety of professions. And then the book is all about tools, and there is nothing which delights a child so much. Hammers and saws belong to the providence of life that positively calls for imitation. The juvenile lyrical drama, surely to be the most ancient Thespian model, wherein the trades of mankind are successively simulated to the running burden on the cold and frosty mornings, gives a good instance of the artistic taste of the children. And this need for overt action and lay figures testifies to a defect in the child's imagination, which prevents him from carrying out his novel in the privacy of his own heart. He does not yet know enough of the world and men. His experience is incomplete. That stage wardrobe and scene room that we call the memory is so ill provided that he can take only a few combinations and bodily out few stories of his own content without some external aid. He is at the experimental stage. He is not sure how one would feel in certain circumstances. To make sure, he must come as near trying it as his means permit. And so here is young heroism with a wooden sword. A mother's practice their kind vocation over a bit of jointed stick. It may be laughable enough just now, but it is the same people and the same thoughts that not long hence, when they are on the theatre of life, will make you weep and tremble. For children think very much the same thoughts and dream the same dreams as bearded men and marriageable women. No one is more romantic. Fame and honor, the love of young men and the love of mothers, the businessman's pleasure and method, all of these and others they anticipate and rehearse in their play hours. Upon us, who are further advanced in fairly dealing with the threads of destiny, they only glance from time to time to glean a hint of their own mimic reproduction. Two children playing at soldiers are far more interesting to each other than one of the scarlet beans whom both are busy imitating. This is perhaps the greatest oddity of all. Art for art is their motto, and doing of grown folks are only interesting as the raw materials for play. The true parallel for play is not to be found, of course, in conscious art, which, though it be derived from play, is itself an abstract, impersonal thing, and depends largely upon philosophical interest beyond the scope of childhood. It is when we make castles in the air and personate the leading characters of our own romances that we return to the spirit of our first years. Only there are several reasons why the spirit is no longer so agreeable to indulge, Nowadays, when we admit to this personal element into our divagations, we are apt to stir up uncomfortable and sorrowful memories, and remind ourselves sharply of old wounds. Our daydreams can no longer lie all in the air like a story in the Arabian Nights. They read to us rather like the history of a period to which we ourselves had taken part, wherein we come across many unfortunate passages and find our own conduct sharply reprimanded. And then the child, mind you, acts his part. He does not merely repeat them to himself. He leaps, he runs, he sets the blood agog all over his body. So his play breathes him, and he no sooner assumes a passion than he gives it vent. Alas! When we betake ourselves to our intellectual form of play, sitting quietly by the fire or lying prone in the bed, we rouse many hot feelings for which we can find no outlet. Substitutes are not acceptable to the mature mind, which desires the thing itself. And even to rehearse a triumphant dialogue with one's enemies, although it is perhaps the most satisfactory piece of play still left within our reach, it is not entirely satisfying. It is even apt to lead to a visit to the interview which may be the reverse of triumph after all. In the child's world of dim sensation, play is all in all. Making believe is the gist of his whole life, and he cannot so much as take a walk except in character. I could not learn my alphabet without some suitable mise en scene, and had to act a businessman in an office before I could sit down to my book. Will you kindly question your memory and find out how much you did, work or pleasure, in good faith and soberness, and for how much you had to cheat yourself with some invention? I remember as though it were yesterday the expansion of spirit, the dignity and self-reliance that came with a pair of mustaches and burnt cork, even when there was no one to see. Children are even content to forego what we call the realities and prefer the shadow to the substance. When they might be speaking intelligibly together, they chatter senseless gibberish by the hour, and are quite happy because they are making believe to speak French. I have said already how even the imperious appetite of hunger suffers itself to be gulled and led by the nose with the fag end of an old song. And it goes even deeper than this. When children are together, even a meal is felt to be an interruption in the business of life, and they must find some imaginative sanction and tell themselves some sort of story to account for, to color, to render entertaining the simple process of eating and drinking. What wonderful fancies I have heard evolve out of the pattern upon teacups, from which there followed a code of rules and a whole world of excitement until tea-drinking began to take rank as a game. When my cousin and I took our porridge in the morning, we had a device to enliven the course of the meal. He ate his with sugar and explained it to be a country continually buried under snow. I took mine with milk and explained it to be a country suffering from gradual inundation. You can imagine us exchanging bulletins, how here was an island still unsubmerged, here a valley not yet covered with snow, what inventions were made, how his population lived in cabins on perches and traveled on stilts, and how mine were always in boats, how the interest grew furious till the very last corner of safe ground was cut off on all sides, and grew smaller every moment, and how in the end the food was altogether secondary in importance, and might even have been nauseous so long as we seasoned it with these dreams. But perhaps the most exciting moments I have ever had over a meal were in the cases of calves' feet jelly. I was hardly possible not to believe, and you may be sure, so far from trying, I did all that I could to avoid the illusion. But some part of it was hollow, and that sooner or later my spoon would lay open the secret tabernacle of the golden rock. There might be some miniature Redbeard waiting his hour. There might one find the treasure of the 40 thieves. And so I queried on slowly, with bated breath, savoring with interest. Believe me, I had little palate left for the jelly, and though I preferred the taste when I took cream with it, I often used to go without, because the cream dimmed the transparent fractures. Even with games, this spirit is authoritative with right-minded children. It is thus that hide-and-seek has so preeminent a sovereignty, for it is the wellspring of romance. The actions and excitement to which it gives rise lend themselves to almost any sort of fable. And thus cricket, which is a mere matter of dexterity, probably about nothing for no end, often fails to satisfy infantile cravings. It is a game, if you like, but not a game of play. You cannot tell yourself a story about cricket, and the activity it calls forth can be justified in no rational theory. Even football, although it admirably simulates the tug and ebb and flow of battle, has presented difficulties in the mind of young sticklers after verisimilitude. And I knew of at least one little boy who was mightily exercised about the presence of the ball, and had to spirit himself up whenever he came to play with an elaborate story of enchantment, and to take the missile as a sort of talisman bandied about in conflict between two Arabian nations. To think of such a frame of mind is to become disquieted about the bringing up of children. Surely they dwell in a mythological epoch and are not contemporaries of their parents. But what can they think of them? What can they make of these bearded or petticoated giants who look down upon their games, who move only in the cloudy Olympus, following unknown designs apart from rational enjoyment, who profess the tenderest solicitude for children, and yet every now and again reach down out of their altitude and terribly vindicate the pejoratives of age? Off go the children, corporally smarting but morally rebellious. Were there ever such unthinking deities as parents? I would give a great deal to know what, in 9 cases out of 10, is the child's unvarnished feelings. In a sense of past cajolery, a sense of personal attraction, at best very feeble. Above all, I should imagine a sense of terror for the untried residue of mankind, go to make up the attraction that he feels. No wonder poor little hearts, with such a weltering world in front of them, that he clings to the hand that he knows. The dread irrationality of the whole affair, as it seems to children, is a thing that we're all too readily to forget. Oh, why, I remember passionately wondering, why can we not all be happy and devote ourselves to play? I thought that was a very interesting take on childhood and play and the differences between adults and children. This is a poem written in 1968, Wilmington, Delaware, by Nikki Giovanni. Happy birthdays. Childhood remembrances are always a drag if you're black. You always remember things like living in Woodlawn with no inside toilet, and if you became famous for something, they never talk about how happy you were to have your mother all to yourself, and how good the water felt when you got into your bath from one of those big tubs that folks in Chicago barbecue in. And somehow when you talk about home, it never gets across how much you understood their feelings, as the whole family attended meetings about Hollydale. Or even though you remember your biographers never understand your father's pain, he had to sell his stock, and another dream goes, and though you're poor, it isn't poverty that concerns you. And although they fought a lot, it isn't your father's drinking that makes any difference, but only that everybody is together, and you and your sister have happy birthdays and very good Christmases. And I really hope no white person ever has cause to write about me, because they never understand black love is black wealth, and they'll probably talk about my hard childhood, and never understand that all the while I was quite happy. This section is an excerpt from the novel A Picture of Dorian Gray, written by Oscar Wilde. Golden days. Let us go sit in the shade, said Lord Henry. Parker has brought out drinks, and if you stay any longer in this glare, you will be quite spoiled, and Basil will never paint you again. You really must not allow yourself to become sunburned. It will be unbecoming. What can it matter? Cried Dorian Gray, laughing as he sat down on the seat at the end of the garden. It should matter everything to you, Mr. Gray. Why? Because you have the most marvelous youth, and youth is the one thing worth having. I don't feel that, Lord Henry. No, you don't feel that now. Some day, when you are old and wrinkled and ugly, when thought has seared your forehead with its lines, and passion branded your lips with its hideous fires, you will feel it terribly. Now, wherever you go, you charm the world. Will it always be so? You have a wonderfully beautiful face, Mr. Gray. Don't frown. And beauty is a form of genius, is higher indeed than genius, as it needs no explanation. It is of the greatest fact in the world, like sunlight, or springtime, or the reflection on dark waters of the silver shell that we call the moon. It cannot be questioned. It has its divine right of sovereignty. It makes princes of those who have it. You smile. Oh, when you have lost it, you won't smile. Yes, Mr. Gray, the gods have been good to you. But what the gods give, they quickly take away. You have only a few years in which to live really, perfectly, and fully. When your youth goes, your beauty will go with it, and then you will suddenly discover that there are no triumphs left for you, or have to contend yourself with those mean triumphs that the memory of your past will make more bitter than defeats. Every month as it wanes brings you nearer to something dreadful. Time is jealous of you, and wars against your lilies and your roses. You will become sallow, hollow-cheeked, and dull-eyed. You will suffer horribly. Ah, realize your youth while you have it. Don't squander the gold of your days listening to the tedious, trying to improve their hopeless failures, or even giving away your life to the ignorant, the common, or the vulgar. These are the sickly aims of false ideas of our age. Live. Live the wonderful life that is in you. Let nothing be lost upon you. Be always searching for new sensations. Be afraid of nothing. A new hedonism. That's what our century wants. You might be a visual symbol. With your personality, there is nothing you could not do. The world belongs to you for a season. The moment I met you, I saw that you were quite unconscious of what you really are, of what you really might be. There was so much in you that charmed me that I felt that I must tell you something of yourself. I thought how tragic it would be if you were to be wasted. And there is such a little time that your youth will last. Such a little time. The common hill flowers wither, but they blossom again. The laburnum will be yellow again next June, just as it is now. In a month there will be purple stars on the clements, and year after year the green night of its leaves will hold its purple stars. But we never get back our youth. The pulse of joy that beats in us at 20 becomes sluggish. Our limbs fail and our senses rot. We degenerate into hideous puppets, haunted by the memory of the passions of which we were too much afraid, the exquisite temptations that we had not the courage to yield to. Youth. Youth. There is absolutely nothing in the world but youth. Dorian Gray listened, open-eyed and wondering. The spray of lilacs he had been holding fell from his hand upon the gravel. A furry bee came and buzzed around it for a moment. Then it began to scramble all over the oval, scintillated globes of the tiny blossoms. He watched it with that strange interest in trivial things that we try to develop when things of high import make us afraid, when we are stirred by some new emotion which we cannot find expression, or when some thought that terrifies us lays sudden siege to the brain and calls on us to yield. Suddenly Basil Hallward appeared at the door of the studio and made staccato signs for them to come in. They turned to each other and smiled. "I'm waiting," he cried. "Do come in. The light is quite perfect, and you can bring your drinks." They rose up and sauntered down the walk together. As they entered the studio, Lord Henry flung himself into the large wicker armchair and watched Dorian. The sweep and dash of the brush on the canvas was the only sound that broke the stillness, except when, now and then, Hallward stepped back to look at his work from a distance. In the slanted beams that streamed through the open doorway, the dust danced and was golden. The heavy scent of the roses seemed to brood over everything. After about a quarter of an hour, Hallward stopped painting, looked for a long time at Dorian Gray, and then for a long time at the picture, biting the end of one of his huge brushes and frowning. "It's quite finished," he cried at last, and stooped down as he wrote his name in long vermilion letters on the left-hand corner of the canvas. Lord Henry came over and examined the picture. It was certainly a wonderful work of art, and a wonderful likeness as well. "My dear fellow, I congratulate you most warmly," he said. "It is the finest portrait of modern times. Mr. Gray, come over and look at yourself." The lad started as if awaking from some dream. "Is it really finished?" he murmured, stepping down from the platform. "Quite finished," said the painter, "and you have sat splendidly today. I am awfully obliged to you." "That is entirely due to me," broke in Lord Henry, "isn't it, Mr. Gray?" Dorian made no answer, and he passed listlessly in front of the picture and turned towards it. When he saw it, he drew back, and his cheeks flushed for a moment with pleasure. A look of joy came into his eyes, as if he recognized himself for the first time. He stood there motionless and in wonder, dimly conscious that Hallward was speaking to him, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came on him like a revelation. He had never felt it before. Basil Hallward's compliments had seemed to him to be merely the charming exaggerations of friendship. He had listened to them, laughed at them, forgotten them. They had not influenced his nature. Then came Lord Henry Wotton, with his strange panegyric on youth, his terrible warning on its brevity, that had stirred him at the time, and now, as he stood gazing at the shadow of his own loveliness, the full reality of the description flashed across him. Yes, there would be a day when his face would be wrinkled and wizened, his eyes dimmed and colorless, the grace of his figure broken and deformed. The scarlet would pass from his lips, and the gold steal from his hair. The life that would make his soul would mar his body. He would become dreadful, hideous, and uncouth. As he thought of it, a sharp pang of pain struck through him like a knife, and made each delicate fiber of his nature quiver. His eyes deepened in amethyst, and across them came a mist of tears. He felt as if a hand of ice had been laid upon his heart. "How sad it is," murmured Dorian Gray, with his eyes fixed on his own portrait. "How sad it is that I shall grow old and horrible and dreadful. But this picture will remain always young. I will never be older than this particular day in June. If it were only the other way, if it were I who were always young and the picture that would grow old, for that I would give everything. Yes, there is nothing in this whole world I would not give. I would give my soul for that." This next section, let's see. This is 4 letters written in England around the year 1225. And I'll read this description of what they are here. Four letters from students to their parents, often embellished with biblical quotations or classical allusions to highlight the writer's talents. Letters asking for funds or expressing anger from lack of receipt were not uncommon during the period. One Italian father soberly lamented, "A student's first song is a demand for money, and there will never be a letter that does not ask for cash." The 2 middle letters were written by students at the University of Oxford, which had been founded in the 12th century. So I think, if anything, proves that no matter what year it is, some things never change. So these were written back in 1225. So here's the first letter. To his venerable Lord and Father A. B, his son and student, sends greetings. I have eagerly embraced the path to wisdom and instruction so that, encountering poverty, I may be capable of enduring many forms of it. For on this side is hunger, and on that side is cold, and on the other side is the exhaustion of labor. Nevertheless, I do not complain, because this would not be unfamiliar to me. But I do bewail certain other misfortunes, because it makes it impossible for my work to advance in performance. For, starving and languishing, I cannot scarcely pour out works at top of works. Therefore I send pious prayers to your paternity, seeking anxiously that, by the prompting of the Holy Charity, you will look on my poverty with the eye of clemency. Farewell. So here's the next letter. B, to his venerable master A. Greetings. This is to inform you that I am studying at Oxford with the greatest diligence, but the matter of money stands greatly in the way of my promotion, as it is now 2 months since I have spent the last of what you sent me. The city is expensive and makes many demands. I have to rent lodgings, buy necessities, and provide for many other things that I cannot now specify. Wherefore I respectfully beg your paternity that by the promptings of divine pity you may assist me, so that I may be able to complete what I have well begun. For you must know that without Ceres and Bacchus, Apollo grows cold. Therefore I hope that you will act in such a way, by your intercession, I may finish what I have well begun. Farewell. And then this one is to a mother. To my dearest mother A., B, her son, sends greetings. A mother's love for her child is bound to be strong and gracious, but if a widow changes her maternal habits, she will be crueler than a stepmother. For until now, both in deed and in word, you showed me maternal piety. If you relieved my want through some lavish of favor, that would your former feelings might endure in you, so that I might find you as I used to find you, and as I shall find you, God willing, because I have never offended you, nor shall I offend you in my life. You will know, moreover, that I am well at Oxford, and as happy as possible, but I have been bare of clothing for a long time, and I am hungry, because I have no money for which I may choose to allay my thirst or hunger. And so I pour out my pious prayers to your maternity, seeking anxiously that you, with the right hand of largesse, you raise up your son, who has been lying low until now in the lake of misery. May you look to his immediate welfare, so that he might visit you in a better state and stay for a longer time. Farewell. And so this last letter is one of scolding a parent for not sending money. To his father, his son sends greetings. Upon your scholar, O pious paternity, may you cause your affection to flow always and abundantly. The course of nature is seriously distorted, and the laws of equity seem violated in a father who does less than he might for his son. And for God's sake, what sort of goodness is there in a man who is oblivious to his own offspring? Lions and tigers defend their young until they can thrive by their own natural fierceness, and are seen to teach their skills by demonstration while providing for the necessities of life for them. More savage, therefore, than the savage beast is he who fails to come to the aid of his own son, especially one whose intention is to live honestly, and by living honestly to be acceptable both to God and to his parents. I received your paternity's letter, by which you showed, so far as words go, that you hold us in tender paternal affection, but so that your affection is not expressed only in literary form, but practical performance in the sending of necessities should generally follow it up, lest otherwise I regard your paternity assistance as valueless. Farewell. So, I found this quite amusing. Students sending letters home asking for money is a timeless task. And then finally, there's one last thing here I'm going to read. Speaking of calling your parents out for their failings in your raising, this was written by Franz Kafka, and it is a letter that was unsent to his father, written in 1919 in Prague. Filing a grievance. Dear Father, you have, I think, a gift of bringing up children, and such an upbringing could certainly have benefited someone like you. Such a person would have grasped the reasoning behind what you told him, and would not have concerned himself with other things, and would quietly have done your bidding. For me as a child, though, everything you barked at me was as good as God's law. I never forgot it. It remained for me the most important means of judging the world, above all for judging you, and there you failed completely. Since as a child I was with you mainly at mealtimes, your lessons were for the most part lessons of correct table manners. Whatever you brought to the table had to be eaten up. The quality of food was not to be mentioned. You, though, often found the meal inedible, called it swill, and the beast, the cook, had ruined it. Because you, driven by your own predilections and sizable appetite, ate everything fast, hot, and in large mouthfuls. The child had to hurry. Gloomy silence reigned at the table, interrupted by admonitions. First eat, then speak, or faster, 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 or look, see, I finished ages ago. We were not allowed to crunch bones. You were. We were not allowed to slurp vinegar. You were. The main thing was for the bread to be cut straight, but that you did so with a knife dripping with gravy was irrelevant. We had to take care not to let any scraps fall into the floor. In the end, they were mostly under your seat. At the table we were to do nothing except eat, but you cleaned and trimmed your fingernails, sharpened pencils, dug into your ear with toothpicks. Please understand me correctly, Father. These, in themselves, would have been only utterly insignificant details. They only came to depress me because they meant that you, a figure of such tremendous authority for me, did not yourself abide by the commandments that you imposed. Hence there were for me 3 worlds, one where I lived, a slave under laws that had been invented solely for me, and, moreover, with which I could never fully comply, I did not know why, then another world, infinitely distant from mine, in which you dwelt, busy with ruling, issuing orders, and being angry when they were not obeyed. And finally a 3rd realm, where everybody else lived happily, free from orders and obligation. I was forever in disgrace. Either I obeyed your orders, which was a disgrace, for they applied after all only to me, or I was defiant. That was also a disgrace, for how dare I presume to defy you, or for my reasons for failing to obey that which I lacked, for example, your strength, or your appetite, your aptitude, though you expected it of me as a matter of course. That was, in fact, the greatest disgrace of all. This is not how I thought as a child, but rather how I felt. And what is more, without being able to voice any objection, you are completely incapable of having a calm discussion on any topic that you do not approve of, or, indeed, one that you have not yourself raised. Your imperious temperament prohibits it. In recent years, you have blamed this on your heart condition. In reality, I do not know that you were ever any different. Your heart condition is at every means, at least, by which you dominate more absolutely, as the mere thought of it is enough to stifle any contradiction. Naturally, I am not reproaching you for this. I am merely establishing a fact. You used to say, for example, there is simply no reasoning with her. She flies in your face regardless. But in fact, it was never she who attacked first. You tend to confuse issues with people. The issue under discussion flies in your face, and you react to it without even listening to the person. Whatever is said with hindsight can only aggravate you further, never change your mind. All you say is, do what you want. As far as I'm concerned, it is your choice. You're old enough. It is not for me to give you advice. And all that spoken with the awful hoarse undertones of anger and utter condemnation that admittedly makes me shudder less today than in my childhood, but only because the sense of guilt that has so pervasively consumed me as a child has since been superseded in part by insight into the helplessness that we shared. Our inability to get on calmly had one more very natural consequence. I lost the ability to speak. I probably never would have turned out to be the greatest speaker in any case, but I would have at least grasped language in a normal degree of fluency. However, you forbade me to speak from a very early age. Your threat, not a word of contradiction, together with the images of your raised hand, has haunted me ever since I can remember. In your presence, for you are, when on familiar ground, an excellent speaker, I stuttered and sputtered, and that angered you too. In the end, I stopped speaking, perhaps at first in defiance, but gradually because I was really no longer able to think or speak in your presence. Because you were present throughout my upbringing, this went on to affect every aspect of my life. In any case, you are curiously mistaken if you believe that I was bent on disobeying you. Persistent contrariness was really never my guiding principle where you were concerned, as you believe and reproach me for. On the contrary, if I had tried less hard to follow you, I am sure you would have been much more satisfied with the results. Well, I hope you've enjoyed these selected readings. Voices in Time, I think as it says here in the book. I've got about another half of the book to read, and so I'm really looking forward to the other articles in here. So thank you for watching. I hope that you have learned something, and I hope this has been an enjoyable experience. Perhaps relaxing, perhaps hoping to calm you down at the end of the day and educate you a little bit. I know this has certainly educated me a lot. So please subscribe to my channel and let me know what you think about these readings, and if you would like to hear some more. And I will see you guys in my next video. Thanks.